Okay, so we've had a couple weeks off here, and the last time we met, we were looking at Moses having an encounter with a burning bush. Remember that? So you got the burning bush. The burning bush speaks to him, and he goes over to it to check out the burning bush. Now, the interesting thing is that in the burning bush, we know from Scripture that God's speaking. And he gives him a name because he asks him, he gives him a task. He says, I want you to go to Egypt, get my people, bring them out. And he's haggling with God about how he's not the right guy. He can't talk. He's got a stuttering problem. He's given up all his limitations. And God's saying, look, I'm clear on who you are and your limitations. I'm going with you. See, so there's no excuse other than you just bailing on me. Okay, so that's what God says to all of us. All of us come up with reasons why we can't do, and He's like, yes, I know you can't do. But see, I'm coming with you. Like I'm involved heavily in the relationship and in the things I'm calling you to do. And so we don't have that excuse, and neither did Moses. But in that exchange, Moses says, well, tell me what your name is, because if I go over there and tell them that their God says that we're supposed to leave and that they ought to follow me, I got to tell them, who it is that you are. And he gives this name. He says, I am that I am. And so that's a powerful word right there, because God is giving description now to His people about who He is, and He's expanding on who He is. Okay, so that's a big deal, that in generations to come, who gets solidified in the identity of the people of the great I am, or the I am that I am, like God is the I am. They really revered that as one of God's names. They wouldn't even, they started to revere the name of God so much they wouldn't even speak it. So they thought it kind of brought God down for them to even speak it, so they wouldn't even say His name. So in further generations, that name kind of was holy and revered and a big deal. Okay? So having said that, if we got 1500 BC, which is an approximate date, I don't have any absolutes up here. This is generally speaking, 1500 BC, when that happened to Moses. If we jump forward 1500 years to Jesus, because here's the cross, and this obviously signifies His death on the cross. So if He was, in His ministry, which were the 3.5 years right before the cross, Jesus makes this statement, and it's written down in John 8:58. He says, I am that voice in the bush. He says that to His detractors, the Pharisees, which they were like, ooh, that's an incredible, ridiculous claim. That you're that voice, that was you? What are we talking about? It's almost like, now listen to him, guys. He's absolutely crazy. We need to kill this person. So see, that's kind of what he was doing, but it's the truth. That's what Jesus' claim was, that I am that voice. What does that say about Jesus? He's like, I know that I'm here in this space and time in a little earth suit, because that was the Father's plan, to plant me into a human woman and for me to grow full term and then to mature up into a man, and then to, as I step upon this stage, that's what we're talking about, that was prepared for me to make this type of a claim. Here I am, but here I want you to know, guys, that I am God. The only way He can make that claim is to say that I was that person that did that 1500 years ago in a bush, is to say that He's outside of time, right? He's above and beyond, right? He's not strapped by time. Not the Son of God, who's part of the Trinity. He's outside of time. In other words, He was there. When that happened, He was there. Obviously, He's outside of things. So it's a big claim. But nevertheless, that's what He made. That's what we're trying to study through here, is exactly what he made. So, just giving you a little touch point as to where we're headed. Remember, we've gone from Abraham through the patriarchs, down to Joseph. Remember, Joseph was sold into slavery and ended up in Egypt. Eventually rose to power because of a great famine. And then because of that famine as well, here his brothers come to get grain, because he had prophetically known what to do with his power and preparing for this famine that God told him was coming before it came. And so when it did come, he had all the grain stored up in Egypt. And so from where his father and brothers, Joseph's father and brothers were living. They had to come get grain, and so they get reconnected. We went through all that. And then what eventually happened was all of 75 members of the household of Jacob and his 12 sons, including Joseph, ended up in Egypt, in a little place. They gave them a land called Goshen, because they were herdsmen. They gave them this nice land where they could do what they do, and then what happened was that there came about a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph or his people, and he just had these slaves. He turned them into slaves because they were multiplying and becoming such a mighty people. And so they get enslaved, which is what God told Abraham that. He said, your people are going to be enslaved 400 years. Just know that. That's in Scripture, so this is a prophetic promise. So they go into Egypt as a family of 75. After 400 years, they come out of Egypt a nation. Some people have bloated their numbers up to 2 million people. Now, who knows exactly? There's a lot of them. In fact, we get numbers for how many there are in the desert later on in the story. But a lot of people. So it went from a small family of 75 to a nation, okay, which was also a prophetic promise. Remember the Abrahamic covenant said that. Remember what the Abrahamic covenant is? And the 3 tenets? Land. I'm going to give you land, Abraham. I'm going to give you a nation, Abraham. See, that's the nation part. And I'm going to give you a seed, which is the Christ to come. Okay, so we're just walking through the story here, continuing on. So today we've already gone over the burning bush, and Moses has now gone back to Egypt, and now he's making his claim to Pharaoh. He's just coming straight up to Pharaoh in the court, meeting him different parts of the day. He was familiar with Pharaoh's comings and goings, because remember, he lived there for 40 years. This is likely his brother. So he likely knew this guy. So, interesting stuff. Anyway, so this is the story today. We're looking at this list of plagues that are released upon Egypt that are supposed to shake them to the point that they finally give in and say, okay, you can take it. Now, we don't want to miss what this means for our own lives, because I've experienced this in my own life, and I know you guys have. I've seen this in my children's lives. You know, when you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, and the people above you are telling you so, and saying, look, stop doing that. Stop doing that, and then they give you a punishment. I know in my life that's happened, that sometimes when that happens, instead of me going, oh yes, I'm wrong, and I'm broken, and I'm sorry, and I'm ready to change, instead, I get angry and kind of hunker down in my anger and say, yeah, okay, I'll take your punishment. But you haven't changed me at all. Right? Y'all ever had that happen in your own heart? I know looking back in my life in high school, I remember this really, well, I did this with my parents a whole lot too, but in high school, I was so rebellious, and I was a football player, but I was a rebellious guy. And so the football coaches started trying to really bring down the thunder on my life to try to change me and get me to stop doing things. And I remember having this anger come up, like, you're not going to tell me what to do. And I just kind of burned, like they were disciplining me at school and trying to get me to do what they thought I should, which is what I should have done. But instead I got angry. And it didn't break me, it made me worse. And every subsequent thing that they did and said to me to try to break me, to try to bring me to, hey, come to your senses, Paul, I didn't. I didn't allow it to do that. I got harder and harder and harder. And subsequently missed out on my senior season of football, which I was a starter and played, and we had a really good team back then. And I missed that because of my own hardness. And I regret that, guys. You don't want regrets in life. Regrets weigh a lot, and they weigh on you. And you go, oh, why did I do that? So I want to bring that into speed right here, because you may be going through something like that in your own life right now. You may be being disciplined by someone who is over you, who loves you, who wants to see you do the right thing, and you may be getting angry and hard-hearted is the word, as opposed to being broken and just going, yes, Lord, I want to go in the right direction. Teach me, show me. Being submissive of heart, that's what that is. And so you don't want to do that, because this story about Pharaoh and his slaves, God's people, the Israelites, who were Pharaoh's slaves at this time, God is coming and saying, look, Pharaoh, I'm taking my people out of here, one way or another. That's what's going to happen. Now you can either get with the program and release them to me, or you can suffer until you get broken. Okay? And so that's what this is. The whole human element of this is the fact that certain things are going to take place, and it can either happen in a very detrimental way to you, or you can give way to it and let change occur as change is going to occur as God would dictate it. Okay? And especially, guys, in a teenage life, this is the period of time where you guys think you know the way, and you feel certain, and you have strong desires, and you want to go this way or that way. And those who are ahead of you, who have been there, are saying, no, that's not what you want. Don't do that. So this is the time of life where you might act like Pharaoh quite a bit and get hardened. You know, God's discipline comes, maybe even through a parent or through a teacher, through a coach. God's discipline comes, and you could get hardened instead of allowing it to change you so that you can change. So don't let that happen. So let's take a look at what happened to old Pharaoh, because he had a rough road here. All right, we're in Exodus 4, and in Exodus 4, this is where Moses is giving, the Lord's trying to share with him, look, I'm going to give you power to do this. And he says this, he says, Moses, you are going to be as God to Pharaoh. Whoa, man, that's heavy right there, right? Like God was saying, look, I'm going with you, but you're my representative, and you, Moses, are going to be as God to Pharaoh. Okay? But here's what Moses said. He said, look, I can't talk. I got a stuttering problem. And so God's like, all right, I'll work with you here. You let your brother, Moses' brother, Aaron, Moses' brother Aaron, he says, okay, you'll be as God to Pharaoh, and Aaron will be your mouthpiece. He'll be your prophet. Isn't that an interesting thing? So Moses is rolling into town, and he's not going to even say much. He's just going to be this like godlike figure after some time goes on. And Aaron is the one doing all the talking. It's like, I'm so big and bad that I don't even have to talk for myself. Here's my mouthpiece over here. He's gonna intercede, and I'm just gonna stand back and look really powerful. So this is kind of what's going on, right? There's a lot of other things I can get into about Pharaoh's court and whatnot, but I won't do that, because I want to get into the plagues. Now the plagues, interesting plagues here, guys. I don't know if y'all ever known this before, but God says in Exodus 12:12, He says, against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. Okay? So these plagues are very specific in their intentionality. Okay? Because the Egyptians had a bunch of gods, a bunch of crazy wild gods that they worshipped as God. One of them, y'all heard the one for Ra. Ra is the sun god. We've all watched enough movies that have had Egypt and their gods in it enough to know some of them, because they're used quite often. Ra is the sun god, you know. And then have you ever noticed in movies when they're talking about, like, they'd always have a beetle, the amulet, little beetle. That was a big deal in Egypt. And the dung beetle. You know what the dung beetle is? The dung beetle is a beetle that will get poop, you know, from animals and get it into a ball and get it bigger and bigger, and they push them around. They push these little dung balls around. They're the dung beetle. And for whatever reason, Egypt decided they wanted to worship the dung beetle. And the interesting thing between the dung beetle and Ra was they thought that, like the sun, you know, the sun goes across the sky, you know, and then kind of disappears and then kind of shows back up the next day. And so they kind of put the two together, and they're like, yeah, the dung beetle is pushing the sun across the sky, and then he pushes it on around, and comes back over, and so the dung beetle's helping out Ra roll himself around and come out. So they had some wild things that they believed, and those things have shifted through time too, which means that, you know, they're just coming up with this stuff. Like, what? Who decided that, right? God, on the other hand, He is who He is, and He has been who He said He was from the beginning. He hasn't changed any. It's the same God. Okay? So Egypt is a little bit different. So what the Lord had decided to do was, look, we're going to roll into town, and then we're going to deliver the judgment on Pharaoh in a way that it will totally humiliate him. Because see, in Egypt and many other cultures also throughout history, the emperor or the Pharaoh or the big shot would be seen as a god himself. Like, this isn't just a human. Like, they're not like me and you. They like our deity. They're either half deity or have some kind of deity. They have some kind of relationship with deity that you don't have. In other words, so you don't want to mess with this person because they'll rain, hellfire down on you because they have that power of the deity to do so. Okay, so when Moses comes in, he gives Pharaoh a fair warning. He says, look, this isn't going to be good for you or your people if you don't go ahead and give in right now. God is going to dismantle you as Pharaoh or as God or as a deity. Does that make sense? In front of your people publicly. Now, something similar happened, I don't know if y'all know this, about Japan in 1940 in the World War II. Japan's emperor was like this recluse. And Japanese culture kind of revolved around their emperor being this deity, right? And so he was this recluse, and they believed it, like he's God. And so what he says goes. And he was almost beginning to be sort of a puppet where some politicians and people around him were kind of dictating that and kind of putting that up for the people to make decisions, and then to blame it on, well, God said so. And so that's how they got themselves into World War II. But see, what was so difficult for the Japanese people to overcome after they lost, because if you're God, should you lose a war that you said you were going into with a bunch of humans that you obviously have power over? So when Japan gets into the war and loses, what do you think the people were thinking about their deity emperor? Maybe he's not so godlike, right? That's a hard thing to face. Things that you think you believe, and then they crash. They don't come to pass. And so this is a similar thing that's happening to Egypt. Because each one of the plagues, y'all remember the first plague, that's in Exodus 7:20, is he's going to turn the water into blood. Okay? Now, I didn't look this God up. The name of the God is Happy, I guess is how you say it. But I should have looked it up. I don't know why I didn't. Anyway, some of the other ones I have looked up to understand how he's coming against this God. But at any rate, the first plague was that all the water turns to blood. Okay? Now, here's the interesting thing that we also need to have an understanding about, because Pharaoh's magicians or his sorcerers who were in his court were able to perform the same miracle. Okay? They were able to do a work using their dark arts that caused Pharaoh to go, okay, that's pretty impressive, but my guys can do that as well. So, big deal, which makes you wonder if they really had power, why wouldn't they undo it instead of do more of it, right? But however, this is the point I want to make, though, because the Pharaoh's magicians are able to conjure up 2 or 3, I can't remember exactly, maybe 3 of the plagues that Moses brings. They're able to do them as well, which we need to make note of, because there are real dark arts, okay, that aren't God. There is real demonic power that can be harnessed and utilized. There's incredible power within the soul of man, apart from God, because we were created in His image. There's incredible power in there. And you need to know this because we're told in Revelation it's going to happen again, right? There's going to be works that are done that are miraculous in nature, or at least appear to be so. And we all know some of the magicians that are out there today, man. They do stuff, you're like, whoa, holy moly, how did you do that? I mean, it's good stuff, man. It's not... And so at the same time, there's also demonic power that's mixed in there at some point, because you kind of cross a line there and you get into some dark arts. You get mixed up with some stuff that's really spiritual, and they do some stuff that can be very misleading and very powerful. And so I just give that as a side note there, that they were able to do the same thing. Now the second one is found in Exodus 8:6. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. And the magicians did the same thing with their secret arts, making frogs come up on the land of Egypt. So that's Exodus 8:6 and 7. And here's the interesting thing. You can look this up. There's a god in ancient Egypt that's actually resurfaced, the god of Kek. It's the god of chaos. It's the god of, because you know, like a frog is like an in-between. It's not all water, it's not all land. It's like an in-between. It's like modern day. What's happening right now in modern day is people are wanting to bring up the god of Kek, who's the god of chaos. And what the god of chaos does is it says, hey, there are no borders. You know, there's no borders. Hey, God says there's male and there's female. That's a clear class distinction. The god of Kek says, oh, no, there's transgender. See, we'll make up a whole new category. We're going to smash those things that God would categorize as this is that, and this is this, and all those things. See, what that does is create order, right? If you come in and crash all the borders down and say there are no borders, be whatever you want to be, however you feel, go for it. That will create chaos in a people. Because see, we've got to have structures. It's part of what we need is in our created order. And so the god of Kek was this god with the face of a frog. And so basically what Moses is doing here, he's saying, okay, here you want chaos, here, have this. Have a bunch of it. Let them crawl all over you. Okay? So again, the people are familiar with the god of the frog because they worship it. And here it is. See, it's sort of like a mockery, sort of like an in-your-face type of thing. And Moses is like, and I'm in control of him, by the way. My God controls your God. And here I'm going to multiply him and see how much you like him. Right? Like if God were to multiply himself, people would really like him and be like, yes, more God, more of you, bring it on, you're good, I like it. The more the better. It's like, okay, you're God, Egypt, the more of this God you've got, how do you like that? Do you like more of your God? No. Right, so it's like a mockery. Okay, y'all follow me? All right, so number 3, plague, 8:17. The plague. Now there's different words here in Egyptian, so I'm going to try to get down to they might be a little bit different than what your Bible says. But the plague of insects is what my heading says here. 8:17 it says, then the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth, that it may become gnats throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so. So in the ancient, in the word there, it could be lice. You know what lice is? They're tiny, tiny little things that are very difficult to see. Oh, awful. Don't want that. Lice or flies or gnats. That's what we're talking about. In mass. Okay? Coming out all over the place. Now, that god is the god Hathor or Nut. And it's a direct saying, I am in control here, and I'm going to release this thing all over you. How do you like it? Okay, and then, let's see, 8:17, and they did so, and Aaron stretched out his hand with his staff and struck the dust of the earth, and there were gnats on man and beast. All the dust of the earth became gnats through all the land of Egypt. And the magicians tried with their secret arts to bring forth gnats, but they could not. So there were gnats on man and beast. Now here's a point here. Take a look. Listen here. Then the magician said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." Oh man, that should have got his attention, right? His magicians that were doing some works there, they're really impressed. They're like, oh. It's like a couple of magicians watching each other. Y'all ever seen the show Penn and Teller? Where Penn and Teller, they're magicians by trade and they're big shots. Now, they got this show, I've watched it a couple of times. And what they do is they will have other magicians on, young magicians, that aren't known. And they'll say, okay, do your thing. Let's see, there's an audience behind them. And so these guys will do their thing. And it'll be cool to me, to the untrained eye. I'll be like, wow, pretty cool. And then after they're done, Penn and Teller will just break them down. Like, that was weak. I know we know exactly what you're doing, and it wasn't even done well. That was terrible. And to me, I'm going, wow, I thought it was pretty awesome. So, but sometimes, every once in a while, somebody will come on there and Penn and Teller will watch it and they'll be like, okay, you got something. That was awesome. And see, all of it looks awesome to us, the untrained eye, but you could get their attention. Like if a magician comes on and they're good, then Penn and Teller's going to be, okay, you got a future there because you got it. See, they're impressed. So here these Pharaoh's magicians are watching Moses do what he does, and they've been able to wheel and deal with him up to this point. And here he does something, and they go, okie dokie now. They're looking at each other going, we got a problem here. And then they go ahead and tell Pharaoh, hey, this is the finger of God. In other words, okay, this is out of our hands, and it's out of your hand. And you might ought to take notice. Now, also an interesting thing, but I didn't know this until I studied this around here. Supposedly, through tradition, the two magicians in Pharaoh's court were named Jannes and Jambres. And they're not named in the story here, but Paul mentions them when he's preaching and teaching, many years later. So we got this happening right here. You jump all the way forward to after the time of Christ when the church is born and the Apostle Paul's teaching and preaching. And he makes reference to Jannes and Jambres, who gave Moses a hard time in the wilderness, which means that, and then if you go ahead and study through Jewish history and some of the things that they've written down, they go ahead and call Jannes and Jambres. They say, yeah, it was them in the desert with Moses who did X, Y, and Z. They connect them to a particular conflict in the desert, in the wilderness with Moses, which means that they were the magicians who were doing the works in Pharaoh's court, and they left with Egypt when Israel left. Does that make sense? Not only that, but a whole lot of other Egyptians left with him as well. I didn't realize that. There's scripture that says so. In other words, all of Egypt was rocked by this deal. To the degree that they said, okay, we're talking about a real God here who's really doing stuff, and I want in on that. Right? I don't want this fake thing over here. I want the real thing. And so they just left with them. Right? Not only that, I'm going to go ahead and say it now, but they left with all their money. All their gold, silver, all of their good clothes, everything. They ransacked Egypt on their way out, and they willingly gave these things. It was like a party gift, like, please leave us, please. Take it all, take it, just go. Get out of here. So they walk out of Egypt as Fort Knox. Like they're walking around the wilderness, which that gets into some more stories later on. So it's an interesting thing that Israel was really, or Egypt was rocked by this. Got to hurry, getting off. Okay, so we got the beetle, the dung beetle is next. It doesn't say that, it says swarms. But you have to look into again, some of the wording there. 8:24, then the Lord did so, and there came great swarms of insects into the house of Pharaoh and the houses of his servants, and the land was laid waste because of the swarms of insects in all the land of Egypt. And looking at that language, we find swarms or scarabs, which is that beetle. It references that amulet that was seen all through Egypt. And basically, I think what it's saying is, look like your dung beetle has a job, and he's rolling the raw across the stone. Well, I'm taking him away from his job, and now he's just going to swarm everywhere. I've given him another job. Okay, and so that's another kind of slap in the face to the god that they would worship. Moving right along to plague 5. Let's see, plague 5 is 9:6. 9:6 says, "So the Lord did this thing on the morrow, and all the livestock of Egypt died. But the livestock of the sons of Israel, not one died." So this one is a word called murrain. I don't know what that is, but anyway, it's a disease aimed at livestock. Now, why would he do that? Because they worshipped a god. They worshipped a cow. One of their gods was the cow god. Yeah, a cow. Just like kind of like the Hindus do, I guess. And so he just comes straight against that and just kills them. Pretty rough judgment there. That's the god of Apis, I guess is the way you say it. Okay, and then 9:10. 9:10 was the boils, plague of boils. And it will, this is what he said. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Take for yourselves handfuls of soot from a kiln, and let Moses throw it toward the sky in the sight of Pharaoh, and it'll become fine dust over all the land of Egypt, and will become boils breaking out with sores on man." Okay, now, here's what happened there. He does that, he throws out that. Now, what it was, though, were the ashes were supposed to be a blessing from the god of Sekhmet. And so those ashes were they were viewed as a blessing, and they would do certain things with those to bless, I guess, this or that. So what Moses is doing is saying, "Here, I'm going to take your blessing, I'll throw it out in the sky, and everybody's going to have boils all over them." That's not much of a blessing, right? So again, it's like a slap in the face to what these people were believing. Okay? Next one is hail and fires, lightning bolts. And that's against the god of Geb. So 9:23. And Moses stretched out his staff toward the sky, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and fire rained down to the earth. And the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. So there was hail and fire flashing continually in the midst of the hail, very severe, such as had not been in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. And the hail struck all that was in the field through all the land of Egypt, both man and beast. The hail also struck every plant of the field and shattered every tree of the field. Only in the land of Goshen, where the sons of Israel were, there was no hail. Again, God's people were spared these judgments, which is also a good thing to understand. We're talking about the end times. So you got hail and fire. That has destroyed everything. So it's like Moses saying, "My God controls your God. Here, how do you like more of your God?" Flashing out everywhere. Nobody liked it. Everything is being destroyed. And still Pharaoh, now I've got to get back to Pharaoh real quick, because each one is supposed to, each discipline, so to speak, or judgment, is supposed to bring him to brokenness. And say, okay, have it your way. I'm broken here, but he doesn't. Each one, some of them he kind of vacillates a little bit. He says, okay, I'll bargain with you here, or yeah, tomorrow I'll let him go, and then he would re-harden his heart. So again, this hardening of heart continues to happen. Pharaoh is continuing to not do these things that he's supposed to do. So the next one is 10:13. Getting close to the end here. 10:13 is locusts. So Moses stretched out his staff over the land of Egypt, and the Lord directed an east wind on the land all that day and all that night. And when it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts. And the locusts came up over all the land of Egypt and settled in all the territory of Egypt. They were very numerous. There had never been so many locusts, nor would there be so many again. For they covered the surface of the whole land, so that the land was darkened, and that they ate every plant of the land and all the fruit of the trees, and the hail had left. Thus nothing green was left on tree or plant of the field through all the land of Egypt. And devastation is what's happening. In levels, devastation is what's happening. And Pharaoh is not relenting. However, I'd like to make note that many of the Egyptians, again, were relenting. Okay? So here's what's happening. Pharaoh is being removed as a god in the eyes of the people. He's just being dismantled. The people are giving in. They're like, hey, Pharaoh, would you please get a clue? Because everything's getting destroyed here. And so, see, God's really turning this nation on its head by doing what he's doing. And I'll mention again that many of the Egyptians left with Israel. However, many of them became a problem for Israel as they moved into the desert. Many of them, well, anyway, I won't get into that. 10:22 is darkness. Now, here's the big god of Ra that God is countering. That's 10:22. Let's see here. So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and there was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the sons of Israel had light in their dwellings. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so what's happening here? Ra he's a big dog, man. It's like the sun is a big deal. That's the God of Ra. And God says, hey, I'm going to turn your God's lights out. It's like, hey, I'm powerful enough to just shut it off. And so that's huge, right? That's a big one. Ra is also associated with Pharaoh himself. He's got some kind of relationship there, and which I don't fully understand. But he was seen as like an offspring of Ra or a brother, or have some kind of relationship there. So this one is getting closer and closer to Pharaoh himself and just shutting off the lights for 3 days. And it wasn't like the sun was just blocked either. The wording is that it was pitch blackness, like you couldn't see anything. It was like, I can't see, so I'm going to have to just sit here in one spot because I can't see a thing. Pretty absolute miracle are each one of these plagues. And then 12:29 is the big dogs. This is where Passover comes in, and it's the death of the firstborn. Now, here's something that we want to talk about when we're talking about Passover. Because before this took place, which was the death angel came through Egypt and was killing the firstborn, okay, of every family. And so it's a devastating thing. Okay? Now, what God wanted Israel to know through this, though, he's wanting to foreshadow the cross. Right? So this is the big deal here, and this is the one we want to look at as far as the story goes. Moses and all that happened in Israel. We're talking Egypt is a type of the world, and God's people within Israel are enslaved. Right? They're slaves. And Egypt is a type of the world. So the world is persecuting God's people. And God is saying, look, I've come to bring you freedom out of that. And so in this typology, he's trying to make a picture and a remembrance for the nation about the Christ who would come. Because John 1:29 says, when John the Baptist steps into the desert and begins to preach that the Messiah is on the way, what he says is, behold, the Lamb of God. Now, when he says that, he is referencing exactly to this instance, the Passover. And it's something that they practiced from that point on. So what was happened was, Moses told each of the families of Israel, look, this is about to happen. Here's what you need to do to stay safe. You take an unblemished lamb. Okay, so each family had to take an unblemished lamb and sacrifice the lamb. And actually, there's a lot that went into it. I'm going to hit the high notes here, though. And then you've got to take that lamb's blood and you've got to get it on the doorposts outside of your home. You have got to put the blood of the lamb on the doorposts. Every home that has put the blood of the lamb on the doorposts, the angel of death will pass over. Y'all hear that? That's what it instituted. Okay? Now, I'd like to make this note. It wasn't a matter of whether you were an Israelite or an Egyptian or any other nationality. The salvation or the safety came from the blood. Nothing else. Just the blood. Okay? If an Egyptian was visiting a a family who had the blood on it when all this happened, they're going to be saved. Okay, they're going to be involved. The blood is what signifies the saving. Okay, so each family that did that, so they all did that as a ritual feast. They did what Moses said to do. And so here comes the angel of death, passes over Goshen and all the homes that were covered in the blood of the Lamb. But in the land of Egypt, where that did not occur, every firstborn within the family died, and Pharaoh's son died as well. And that was that's finally what did it. It broke them. And then, so the next scene is them taking off, which next week we'll begin to start right there. But a couple of things I want to take a look at real quick about the Passover, because at that point Israel was told, okay, as we move forward, this now begins our year. The Passover is a big deal. It's like Christmas for us. We will, this is a religious thing that we will institute. It's a commemorative thing. This is a national holiday, so to speak. And it is done to remember the fact that we were brought out of Egypt. We were taken out of slavery into freedom by God. And it's centered around this lamb sacrificed. Okay, does that make sense? So every year they would do this, and that was the beginning of the year. The Passover was a huge week. There's a Passover week that certain things took place that we'll talk about later as well, that commemorated these events of what happened within the wilderness and the wilderness wandering and the being taken out of Egypt. But the centerpiece was this lamb without blemish, this innocent lamb sacrificed for freedom. Okay, so this Passover had a commemorative role, which was just to remember the deliverance from Egypt, but it also had a prophetic role, which describes the deliverance of the entire world from the bondage of sin. So when John the Baptist comes 1,500 years later and says, "Behold, the Lamb of God, He's on the way. Everybody make you straight paths because God's coming." We're pointing back towards this event. Okay, and Egypt was a type or a model of the world, which is material wealth and power. Egypt was ruled by a despotic prince, and the world is ruled by a despotic prince. The prince of the power of the air, which is Satan. The world is lifted up and committed to human wisdom and false religion. Egypt was as well, and ours is as well. Egypt is built upon force, ambition, and pleasure, just like the world is. Egypt persecuted God's people and was eventually overthrown by judgment, which is what is predicted for us to happen as well. So the Passover was a foreshadowing of the cross. Okay? And Jesus came to deliver man from bondage, right? Now, what ties that together here? Ransom. 1 Peter 1:17. We'll finish on this real quick. 1 Peter 1:17. Turn there and find it. 1 Peter. First Peter 1. Oh my gosh, it's been torn out of my Bible here. Look at this. You got a hole. And it's 1:17. Okay, we'll maybe next week I'll take a look at that, and we'll talk about being ransomed. But again, all these things are pointing back. So this is a prophetic look at it. It's a foreshadowing. It's a typology, so that when Christ comes, who is the Lamb, and He lays His life down in the sacrifice, it's the blood that covers, that washes, that cleanses, that the death angel passes over. So it's that. See, that's that correlation there. Now, how did Moses know that Jesus was going to do that, other than God Himself was involved? He's up here seeing all this happen, giving foreshadowings and typologies beforehand to build a platform for the Son to stand upon, proving it to us all that there's something to this book. There's something to these people called the Jews. There's something to this Abrahamic covenant that God gave to Abraham. There's something to it, guys, and His name's Jesus. He's real. He's true. We can walk with Him right now out of bondage. And that's my prayer for you guys.